In the late 2000s, across American suburbs, the independent 12-volt stereo installation bays suddenly went quiet. For a decade, the trunk of an American car had been defined by a physical, violent force. KICKER's square Solo-Baric L7 subwoofers were rattling rear-view mirrors, dominating DB drag racing events, and turning mall parking lots into rolling acoustic battlegrounds. Teenagers were spending more on their stereo systems than the used cars they drove. Then, the garage doors closed. Thousands of local installers locked up for the last time. The massive square woofers were left sitting on retail shelves. The paradox is that the American parking lot did not go silent because youth culture suddenly stopped loving bass. And it did not go silent because KICKER forgot how to move air. It went quiet because Detroit and Japan changed the shape of the dashboard, integrating the factory radio and locking the aftermarket out of the vehicle entirely. But the real story of KICKER is not just the story of the integrated dashboard. It is the story of how an entire American audio empire was built inside the trunk of a car, and what happened when the market permanently closed the lid. Every week, we tell the stories of the American speakers, stereo stores, and installation bays that once shaped how people heard music, and what happened when the market moved on. Subscribe if that history matters to you. The story of KICKER begins not with nostalgia, but with a specific physical problem in the cab of an American pickup truck in Stillwater, Oklahoma in 1980. The American pickup truck of the late 1970s and early 1980s was an acoustic nightmare. The cabin was a metal box, constructed entirely of hard reflective surfaces. The engine rumbled through the firewall. The tires groaned against the highway. The wind ripped past unaerodynamic windshields. Inside that hostile environment, the factory radio was less an audio system and more a concession to basic communication. The standard equipment was usually a single paper cone speaker mounted in the center of the dashboard, or perhaps a pair of anemic speakers bolted into the metal doors. These factory systems could manage human voices and the metallic crash of cymbals, but they suffered from a fatal physical limitation. They completely lacked low-end frequency response. How evenly a speaker reproduces low, middle, and high sounds to create the deep physical impact of a bass drum or a bass guitar line. A speaker requires a woofer, a large driver designed to reproduce low frequencies, but a woofer cannot function in free air. It requires a speaker cabinet, the wooden, plastic, or composite box that holds the drivers and shapes how the speaker interacts with the air. In a single-cab American pickup truck, there was simply no room for a wooden hi-fi cabinet. Because of this physical reality, an entire generation of American drivers simply accepted that driving meant listening to thin, harsh, exhausting sound. If a teenager or a young worker wanted real fidelity, they had to park their vehicle, go inside their house, and sit in a living room in front of a traditional stereo system. The car was for transportation. The house was for listening. In 1980, in the small college town of Stillwater, Oklahoma, a musician and audio builder named Steve Irby was not thinking about cars. He was thinking about churches, auditoriums, and local bands. Irby had founded a modest company called Stillwater Designs, operating out of a small garage. His primary business was building PA speakers, public address speakers designed to project sound to a crowd. He understood how to move large volumes of air in large rooms. He knew how to build heavy, braced wooden cabinets that could survive being thrown into the back of a touring van. But the local market for live sound equipment in rural Oklahoma was limited. The breakthrough did not come from a concert hall, it came from a local request. According to company history, a friend approached Irby with a specific, frustrating problem. The friend drove a pickup truck, and he was tired of the weak, tinny sound coming from the dashboard. He wanted the physical punch of a live concert, but he only had a few inches of dead space located directly behind the bench seat of his truck cab. Irby treated the request not as a car problem, but as a live sound engineering challenge. He measured the exact angle and depth of the space behind a standard pickup truck bench seat. He designed a heavy wedged wooden enclosure that would fit perfectly into that neglected geometry. Inside this custom cabinet, he loaded a heavy-duty woofer alongside mid-range and high-frequency drivers. He called it the original KICKER. It was not a separate subwoofer. It was a complete, full-range audio system packed into a single, aggressively angled wooden box. When the friend wired this custom cabinet to an aftermarket amplifier and pushed the bench seat back into place, the acoustic reality of the pickup truck changed instantly. The heavy wooden enclosure trapped the rear wave of the speaker cone, allowing the woofer to physically punch the air inside the small cabin. The sound was no longer thin and distant. It was violent, physical, and immediate. The bass traveled directly through the fabric of the bench seat and into the driver's spine. Irby had accidentally solved the American truck cabin. Word spread quickly across Stillwater. Teachers, college students, and local workers heard the truck, felt the physical impact of the bass, and realized that the vehicle did not have to sound like an AM radio. Stillwater Designs pivoted almost entirely. Irby began building the original KICKER truck boxes in larger batches. At the exact same time, a new kind of retail infrastructure was quietly spreading across the United States. Throughout the 1970s, Sirius audio equipment was sold in carpeted, quiet hi-fi showrooms. Cars were completely ignored by the high-end audio industry. But by the early 1980s, a new breed of retailer was opening in strip malls and industrial parks across the country. The independent 12-volt stereo store. These local shops, named for the 12-volt electrical systems of automobiles, were run by young technicians and audio enthusiasts who believed that a car could be transformed into a rolling listening room. These independent dealers desperately needed products to sell. When the Stillwater Designs original KICKER arrived on the market, it gave these 12-volt shops a silver bullet. A local installer no longer had to cut massive holes in a customer's metal door panels or try to seal a loose woofer against a rattling dashboard. They could simply sell a customer an amplifier, run the wiring to the back of the cab, and slide the heavy KICKER box behind the seat. The installation was fast. The visual footprint was completely hidden. But the acoustic demonstration was devastating. A teenager could pull their truck into an installation bay with a tinny factory radio and drive out an hour later with a sound system that rivaled the volume of a live rock club. Throughout the 1980s, Stillwater Designs expanded across the American Midwest and into national distribution. The company remained rooted in Oklahoma, building a reputation for rugged, no-nonsense construction. The KICKER badge, often stitched directly into the carpeted exterior of the wooden boxes, became a signal of intent. It meant the driver cared more about extreme dynamic impact than subtle acoustic nuance. It was blue-collar audio, built for the realities of the American road. By the late 1980s, the brand had successfully built a loyal dealer network. They had established a manufacturing pipeline. They had proved that young American consumers were willing to spend hundreds of dollars to upgrade the sound of their vehicles. But the pickup truck cab, by its very definition, was a physical constraint. The original KICKER box could only be so large. The woofers could only push so much air before the bench seat physically blocked their movement. The truck box had solved the pickup cabin, but a much larger, louder, and more aggressive market was waiting inside the American car trunk. By the early 1990s, the American car audio market had migrated from the pickup truck to the suburban driveway. Millions of teenagers and young adults were buying used Honda Civics, Ford Mustangs, and Chevrolet Caprices. These vehicles did not have the physical restrictions of a single cab truck. They had trunks, and a car trunk offered a massive, resonant chamber waiting to be pressurized. To fill a car trunk with sound, a listener did not need a full-range wooden box. They needed a subwoofer, a speaker designed to reproduce very low bass frequencies. The problem with early aftermarket subwoofers was not amplifier power. The problem was geometry. To generate deep physical bass, a woofer must move a massive amount of air. To move that air without destroying itself, the driver requires a large wooden enclosure. In the late 1980s, placing a pair of 12-inch or 15-inch subwoofers in a car usually meant sacrificing the entire trunk. A teenager could have heavy bass, or they could have space for a spare tire and a backpack, but they could not have both. In 1992, KICKER changed the physical equation of the American trunk by releasing the original Solo-Baric subwoofer. The Solo-Baric was a breakthrough in acoustic suspension technology. It was engineered specifically to operate inside a phenomenally small sealed box, a closed speaker cabinet that uses trapped air behind the woofer to control its movement. The air inside the small wooden box acted like a tight, invisible spring, pushing back against the woofer cone and preventing it from flying out of control. Because of this specialized design, a 12-inch Solo-Baric subwoofer could produce deep, devastating bass in a cabinet exactly half the size of a traditional enclosure. It gave the American teenager their extreme bass, and it gave them their trunk space back. This acoustic efficiency made KICKER a primary weapon for the independent 12-volt stereo store. An installer could build a small, custom wooden cabinet that tucked neatly into the corner of a vehicle, leaving room for groceries or school bags while still delivering enough acoustic force to rattle the license plate. But while the original round Solo-Baric was a commercial triumph, the product that would permanently define American youth culture arrived in the year 2000. It was called the Solo-Baric L7, and it was square. For nearly a century, speaker cones had been round. Traditional engineering dictated that a circular cone was the most structurally stable shape to move air without buckling. But the engineers in Stillwater realized that a car trunk is essentially a series of rectangular spaces. When a round speaker is mounted in a square wooden baffle, the corners of that square are wasted space. By engineering a square woofer cone, KICKER captured those corners. A square Solo-Baric L7 provided nearly 20% more surface area than a round subwoofer of the exact same width. In the physics of low frequencies, more surface area equals more displaced air. More displaced air equals a harder physical impact in the cabin. However, forcing a square cone to move violently without tearing itself apart required a massive industrial effort. The heart of any speaker is the voice coil, a coil of wire attached to the speaker cone that moves when electricity passes through it. The L7 utilized heavy-duty, high-temperature dual voice coils and a brutally rigid cast aluminum basket. The square cone was reinforced with structural ridges, and it was held in place by a massive, ribbed foam surround, the flexible ring around a woofer cone that lets it move in and out. When it was powered up, the L7 did not just reproduce a bass guitar or a kick drum, it pressurized the vehicle. In a suburban mall parking lot, the listening experience of a Solo-Baric L7 was highly physical. A teenager sitting in the driver's seat would feel the bass compress their chest. The rearview mirror would vibrate so violently that it became entirely useless for seeing traffic. The roof of the car would visibly flex outward with every heavy bass drop. The American audio industry took immediate notice. Car Audio and Electronics magazine praised its output. Auto Sound and Security featured vehicles literally torn apart by its acoustic pressure. The square subwoofer quickly became a dominant force in the booming world of SPL, or sound pressure level competitions, strictly judged by organizations like IASCA and USACI. In these competition lanes, cars were measured purely by the decibel level they could produce, and the square KICKER cones were breaking windshields. This extreme performance created an entirely new retail economy. A single 15-inch Solo-Baric L7 could cost over $500 just for the raw driver. By the time a local 12-volt dealer built a heavy MDF cabinet, wired a high-current amplifier, and upgraded the vehicle's electrical system to handle the massive power draw, the final invoice was staggering. A teenager working a minimum wage job at a fast food restaurant was easily spending $1,500 to $2,000 on their car stereo system. In many cases, the audio equipment in the trunk was worth more than the Kelley Blue Book value of the used car they were driving. This was not a rational economic decision. It was a cultural statement. The square subwoofer had become the ultimate status symbol for an entire generation of young Americans. Circuit City installation bays, Best Buy's mobile audio sections, and local independent stereo shops across the country could barely keep the massive square boxes on their shelves. The heavy amplifier, the thick copper wiring, the custom wooden cabinet, and the square woofer were all part of a connected system that fed an entire ecosystem of American retail. The badge on the square grille was not decoration. It was a warning about moving air. By the late 1990s and into the opening years of the 2000s, KICKER had transcended the status of a mere audio manufacturer. It had become a cornerstone of American youth culture, anchoring a massive, high-decibel ecosystem that stretched from rural high school parking lots to national competition circuits. To understand the scale of this era, one must look across the geographic map of American automotive retail and competition. In Stillwater, Oklahoma, the expanded Stillwater Designs factory operated around the clock, stamping out square cones, winding heavy-duty voice coils, and packaging massive amplifiers that weighed as much as small machinery. In California and Florida, professional sound-off competitors gathered under the scorching sun for official events hosted by IASCA, the International Auto Sound Challenge Association, and USAC, United States Auto Club Sound Off. These were not casual car shows. They were high-stakes acoustic battlegrounds where competitors engineered vehicles specifically to test the physical limits of speaker design and amplifier current. In these competition lanes, the KICKER Solo-Baric L7 was the dominant weapon. A competitor's vehicle would pull up to the judging lanes, sealed shut, with windows reinforced to prevent them from shattering under pressure. A microphone would be mounted on the windshield, connected to decibel meter computers. When the track dropped, the interior of the vehicle would become a violent physics experiment. The square KICKER subwoofers, driven by massive multi-channel amplifiers, pushed air so violently that the sound pressure levels regularly exceeded 150 decibels, a threshold louder than a jet engine taking off at close range. The sound was no longer just music. It was a physical assault on the structure of the car. Away from the professional competition lanes, the cultural footprint was even wider. Across suburban America, the local independent 12-volt stereo shop was the social hub for car-obsessed teenagers. These were specialized retail storefronts, distinct from traditional home hi-fi shops. They featured brightly lit showrooms lined with glowing chrome amplifiers, walls of neon-lit speakers, and glass display cases filled with gold-plated fuse holders and thick 4-gauge power cables. Behind the showroom floor sat the installation bay, a grease-stained, tool-heavy workspace where certified installers performed complex surgery on modern automobiles. These installation bays were temples of customization. A teenager walking into a local 12-volt shop in 2002 was not simply buying a component. They were buying entry into a lifestyle. Installers custom-built fiberglass enclosures shaped directly into the curves of vehicle trunks, wrapping them in gray or black automotive carpet, and framing the square KICKER subwoofers with neon accent lighting. Magazines like Car Audio and Electronics, Auto Sound and Security, and PazMag filled convenience store racks across the country, showing step-by-step guides on how to build custom subwoofer enclosures and upgrade vehicle electrical alternators to feed the heavy power demands. The mainstream media eventually codified this subculture. Television shows like MTV's Pimp My Ride turned car audio installation into pop culture spectacle, where a decaying vehicle would be rescued not by fixing its engine, but by installing multiple amplifiers, massive custom subwoofers, and video screens in the headrests. At the center of this movement was the KICKER Solo-Baric L7. In a suburban mall parking lot on a Friday night, the social hierarchy was instantly broadcasted through acoustic pressure. When a car rolled past with its rear-view mirrors bouncing erratically and the license plate rattling against the trunk lid, everyone within a block radius knew what was driving it. A KICKER system was a status symbol. It signaled to the entire neighborhood that the driver possessed power, volume, and an uncompromising attitude toward mass-market sound. The economic engine behind this culture was staggering. Independent dealers, regional distributors, and national big-box chains like Circuit City and select Best Buy Magnolia locations moved hundreds of thousands of amplifiers and subwoofers every single month. A young worker would spend their entire weekly paycheck on a single KICKER amplifier or a pair of square subwoofers. They accepted dimming headlights and strained alternators as a fair trade for the privilege of moving air. In towns across America, the local stereo shop was thriving because the American car was treated as a personal listening room that could be customized without restriction. The dashboard was modular. The factory radio could be unscrewed, pulled out of the dash, and replaced with an aftermarket head unit that sent clean, high-voltage audio signals directly back to the trunk. The system was whole. The factory provided the frame. The aftermarket provided the soul. But the very success of this aggressive, high-power car audio culture was about to trigger a massive, structural counteroffensive from the automotive industry. The car manufacturers in Detroit, Tokyo, and Stuttgart were watching the dashboard closely, and they were about to take it back. By the turn of the millennium, KICKER had transformed the American trunk into an active theater of acoustic engineering. To maintain this dominance, the factory in Stillwater expanded its research and development wing, recruiting acousticians and mechanical engineers who treated a car chassis not as a passenger compartment, but as a complex bass reflex chamber. The introduction of the Solo-Baric L7 had raised the technical ceiling, but the market demanded more power, cleaner amplification, and heavier thermal handling. The company responded by pushing deeper into high-current amplifier topology. Traditional home audio amplifiers were designed to operate at stable 8-ohm or 4-ohm loads in climate-controlled living rooms. Car audio was a brutal environment. Amplifiers had to survive sub-zero winter mornings in Minnesota and blistering summer heat inside asphalt parking lots in Arizona, while delivering thousands of watts of continuous electrical power into low-impedance loads without melting their internal circuit boards. KICKER's ZX and later KX series amplifiers became legendary for their over-engineered power supplies, heavy aluminum heat sinks, and ruthless efficiency. In audio showrooms from coast to coast, sales associates demonstrated this power through direct comparison boards. A customer could walk into a local shop, place their hand on a demo counter, and feel the physical vibration transmitted through heavy-duty speaker wire connected to an array of KICKER subwoofers mounted in MDF display walls. The demonstration did not rely on subtle acoustic arguments or classical recordings. It relied on absolute, unadulterated physical impact. This retail display culture was supported by a massive network of regional distributors and independent sales reps who treated car audio like professional sports. National trade shows like CES, the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, featured massive, custom-built demo vehicles that drew crowds from around the world. These vehicles were rolling laboratories of fiberglass, chrome, and copper, designed explicitly to showcase what happened when limitless amplifier power met an aggressive, square subwoofer. Yet, beneath the glowing neon displays, the roaring competition lanes, and the packed parking lots, the entire ecosystem was resting on a fragile foundation. The car audio boom of the late 1990s and 2000s assumed an unchanging American automobile landscape. It assumed that every vehicle on the road possessed a modular dashboard with a standard single-DIN or double-DIN radio slot. It assumed that a teenager could take a screwdriver, unbolt the factory head unit, slide it out of the dash, and wire an aftermarket system directly into the vehicle's electrical architecture. It assumed that the car manufacturer and the aftermarket audio installer were operating in separate, peaceful spheres. That assumption was about to be shattered. The dashboard was no longer just a plastic panel holding a radio. It was becoming the central nervous system of the modern automobile, and the automotive manufacturers were preparing to lock the doors. In the mid-2000s, the American car audio industry did not notice the first crack in the foundation. It did not start with a drop in subwoofer sales, a failure in amplifier design, or a sudden change in musical taste. It started quietly, on the assembly lines of Detroit and Tokyo, with the redesign of a plastic dashboard bezel. For decades, almost every car sold in America came with a standardized rectangular opening known as a DIN or double DIN slot. If a teenager bought a used Honda Civic, a Chevrolet Cavalier, or a Ford Ranger, the first step in building a sound system was always the same. They drove to a local 12-volt stereo shop, bought an aftermarket Alpine, Pioneer, or Kenwood CD receiver, and paid an installer to slide it into that standard slot. This aftermarket radio was the critical brain of the entire KICKER ecosystem. It provided the clean, high-voltage, low-level RCA audio signals necessary to feed the massive amplifiers waiting in the trunk. Without that clean signal, a Solo-Baric L7 was just a heavy magnet sitting in a wooden box. Then the standard rectangular slot disappeared. Automakers began molding the factory radio directly into the sweeping curves of the dashboard. They integrated the volume knobs and display screens into the exact same smooth plastic panel that housed the air conditioning vents. At first, it seemed like a minor cosmetic annoyance. Installers adapted by cutting the plastic, ordering expensive custom dash kits, or fabricating fiberglass plates. But the integration was not just visual, it was structural. By the late 2000s, manufacturers began wiring essential vehicle functions directly through the radio's circuit board. In vehicles like the 2003 Honda Accord, the climate controls were permanently fused to the stereo display. If an installer removed the factory radio, the air conditioning stopped working. In GM vehicles, the warning chimes for the seatbelts, the turn signal clicks, and the door ajar alarms were generated by the radio. Some modern cars would even trigger airbag warning lights, or refuse to start entirely if the factory head unit was disconnected. The dashboard had become a closed digital ecosystem. For the independent American stereo shop, this was a systemic catastrophe. The simple one-hour radio swap that used to cost $50 in labor suddenly became a surgical operation. To install a KICKER subwoofer system in these new vehicles, an installer had to leave the factory radio in the dash, tap into the high-voltage speaker wires inside the door panels, and run them into a line output converter, a device that steps down the amplified signal so it can be fed into an aftermarket subwoofer amplifier. The problem was not the KICKER subwoofer. The problem was that the factory radio processed the sound before it ever reached the trunk. Automakers were actively programming their factory stereos to automatically roll off the bass frequencies as the volume increased, specifically to protect their own cheap paper door speakers from blowing out. When an installer tapped into that compromised signal and amplified it, the massive KICKER amplifiers were merely boosting a terrible, pre-distorted, bass-deficient signal. A teenager could spend over $1,000 on a custom enclosure and a square Solo-Baric L7, only to realize the bass sounded muddy, restricted, and artificial. The square cone was still capable of moving massive amounts of air, but it was being starved of the musical information it needed to do its job. This technological lockout broke the economic model of the American 12-volt retailer. A young worker could no longer walk into a Circuit City installation bay or a local independent shop and buy an affordable base package. The cost of labor skyrocketed because the car itself was fighting the installation. What used to be an accessible weekend project became an expensive, frustrating ordeal. Installers were spending hours trying to outsmart the vehicle's computer just to get a clean bass signal. A teenager pulling up to a shop with a few $100s from a summer job would be handed an estimate where the electronic interface modules and custom dash labor cost more than the subwoofers themselves. Most of them simply walked away. Force 5, the technological, retail, and listening culture shift, had officially arrived in the American installation bay. The structural forces of the global automotive industry had decided that the car was no longer a blank canvas for youth culture. It was an appliance, strictly controlled by the manufacturer. As a result, foot traffic in local stereo shops began to plummet. The glowing amplifier display boards in the showrooms went quiet. The thick rolls of copper power wire gathered dust. The massive KICKER boxes sat unsold on retail shelves because the vehicles parked outside refused to accept them. But the integrated dashboard was only the first lock on the trunk. A much larger economic and cultural shift was about to empty the parking lot entirely. Because of this, the expectation of fidelity changed. The new American driver did not demand perfect frequency response or bone-rattling acoustic pressure. They demanded convenience. When automakers began adding Bluetooth audio streaming to their factory radios, the aftermarket car audio industry lost its final argument. The factory system did not sound excellent, but it sounded good enough. A teenager could step into their car, the phone would pair wirelessly, and the music would play. The American car reverted to being an appliance. It was no longer a rolling listening room. This behavioral shift triggered a retail massacre. In 2009, Circuit City, one of the largest national pipelines for aftermarket car audio, filed for bankruptcy and liquidated completely. Thousands of installation bays were shuttered overnight. Best Buy slowly began shrinking its mobile audio departments, tearing down the glowing amplifier display walls and reallocating the floor space to mobile phones, tablets, and wireless headphones. Without the big box stores to drive mass market awareness, the local independent stereo shops were left to fend for themselves in a rapidly shrinking market. The math no longer worked. The new vehicles were too hostile to modify. The younger customers had no money to spend on cars, and the ones who did were spending it on smartphones. The professional SPL competition circuit suffered a similar retreat. The massive sound-off events hosted by IASCA and USACE, which once drew thousands of spectators to fairgrounds across the country to watch KICKER subwoofers flex sheet metal, began to quietly fade. The heavily modified vans with walls of square subwoofers became expensive relics of a bygone era. Across the United States, the retreat was brutal and systemic. The neon signs in the windows of independent 12-volt shops flickered out. The glass display cases full of gold-plated fuses were emptied. The fiberglass resin dried up in the back rooms. A highly skilled workforce of custom installers who understood complex electrical loads, acoustics, and fabrication suddenly found their trade rendered obsolete by a plastic dashboard and a touchscreen phone. The showrooms went dark. The toolboxes were sold. The installers moved on. The big chains collapsed. The catalogs dropped the parts. The culture vanished. The dashboards remained locked. The installation bays closed. The parking lots grew quiet. The square subwoofer was left in the garage. Some fallen audio empires end in sudden bankruptcy, with the brand name quietly auctioned off to a foreign conglomerate, only to be slapped onto cheap plastic Bluetooth cylinders sold in discount stores. KICKER avoided that fate. Stillwater Designs did not die. Realizing that the traditional American 12-volt installation bay was collapsing under the weight of the integrated dashboard, the company executed a ruthless, highly successful pivot. If they could no longer rely on teenagers tearing apart cars to install custom enclosures, they would build sound for vehicles that did not have dashboards at all. KICKER expanded aggressively into marine audio, outfitting wakeboard boats and luxury pontoons with heavy-duty tower speakers. They moved into the power sports market, designing weatherproof audio systems for ATVs, side-by-sides, and motorcycles. And for the modern locked-down automobile, they developed exact fit, OEM plug-and-play upgrade kits that worked seamlessly with the factory computers. The brand survived. The factory in Oklahoma kept producing, but the local, chaotic, high-decibel culture that made the square subwoofer an American icon did not survive with it. The local independent stereo shop, the brightly lit sanctuary of copper wire, fiberglass resin, and neon, was largely wiped off the American map. Today, if you drive past the suburban strip malls that once hosted these sprawling installation bays, the architecture often remains, but the purpose has shifted. The heavy garage doors that once rolled up to reveal half-dismantled Honda Civics and Chevrolet Caprices now house window tinting businesses, quick lube oil change franchises, or empty, abandoned retail space. The showroom display boards that used to shake the floor with a dozen amplified subwoofers have been torn down and thrown into dumpsters. The distinct chemical smell of cut MDF wood and curing fiberglass has been completely scrubbed from the retail landscape. Yet the memory of that era refuses to go entirely quiet. Across the American secondary market, on Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, eBay, and specialized vintage car audio forums, a dedicated preservation community still hunts for the heavy artifacts of the early 2000s. These are not just nostalgic teenagers who finally have adult paychecks. They are audio technicians, bass enthusiasts, and custom builders who actively seek out original Solo-Baric L7 subwoofers and the massive power-hungry ZX and KX series amplifiers. They trade wiring diagrams, rebuild blown voice coils, and carefully replace aging foam surrounds. They buy classic 1990s SUVs like Chevy Tahoes and Ford Broncos specifically to house these massive systems, creating rolling time capsules of a time when audio was meant to be a physical weapon. In a surprising footnote to this history, during the homebound months of 2020, prices for mint condition, early generation KICKER square subwoofers began to spike online. A generation of Americans suddenly trapped at home began buying back the exact stereo equipment they could not afford in high school. The few surviving independent shops suddenly found themselves fielding calls for heavy, custom-built wooden enclosures. It was a brief, powerful echo of a lost era. These collectors rebuild these systems because the original equipment still performs a function that modern technology cannot digitally replicate. Today, a premium factory car audio system relies heavily on DSP, or digital signal processing. The vehicle's computer uses algorithms, active equalization, and synthesized bass enhancement to trick the human ear into perceiving depth and impact from small, efficient, lightweight door speakers. It is a highly controlled, tightly engineered acoustic illusion. But a vintage KICKER square subwoofer does not simulate anything. It is a brute force instrument of physics. When fed raw electrical current from a massive amplifier, it moves physical quantities of real air. It bends the metal of the trunk lid. It compresses the lungs of the listener. It provides a tactile, violent reality that no algorithmic soundbar, paired smartphone, or integrated factory stereo can ever emulate. Not because it is old, but because sound still begins where air moves. The disappearance of the American car audio boom reveals a fundamental shift in how the country interacts with the machines it buys. For decades, the American automobile was a blank canvas, and the stereo system was the ultimate expression of personal control. You bought the car, you tore out the factory compromises, and you built your own environment. But the market decided that convenience, seamless integration, and digital control were more valuable than raw customization. Automakers turned the car from an open mechanical platform into a closed digital appliance, prioritizing a pristine, locked dashboard over the freedom to modify it. We traded the loud, vibrating trunk for the silent, seamless Bluetooth connection. In the process, a sprawling, chaotic, deeply creative American subculture was quietly engineered out of existence. The competition lanes are gone. The massive installation bays are closed. The mall parking lots are quiet. But somewhere in an American suburb, sitting on a reinforced shelf in the back of a dimly lit garage, a heavy square subwoofer waits in the dust, its massive magnet dormant, its ribbed surround still intact, waiting for heavy copper wire, a massive amplifier, and one more chance to move the room. See you in the next one.